Dylan's Fear Files. The 1960s was an important time for the USA. Many great things happened during this time period, such as the Civil Rights Movement, mankind setting foot on the moon, and the summer of 1967 was even proclaimed the Summer of Love. However, even in the brightest times of history, darkness lies in wait. A gruesome and controversial war was being waged in Vietnam. Cultural icons President John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. were assassinated, and cult leader Charles Manson was orchestrating the deaths of innocent people. During this time, one man held the San Francisco Bay Area in his grip, and that man would only be known by one name: Zodiac. On December 20th, 1968, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were going on their first date and promised to be home by 11 p.m. The plan was originally to go to a Christmas concert at Hogan High School, which was only 3 blocks away from Betty Lou's home. Instead, they visited a friend and went out to eat before going to Lake Herman Road, a lover's lane just outside of Benicia, California. At around 9 or 10 p.m., different witnesses saw what appeared to be a light-colored 4-door Chevy Impala parked near the gated entrance to the pumping station just off of Lake Herman Road. At 11 p.m., David parked his mother's brown Rambler station wagon into a gravel turnout by the pumping station. They were there for less than an hour before another car pulled in and parked beside them. The man exited his car, walking toward the Rambler from behind, and opened fire with either a .22 caliber rifle or a pistol loaded with .22 long rifle ammunition. The bullets shattered the right rear window, left rear tire, and then while the killer was coming along the front left, Betty Lou and David fled the car. David was shot a single time at close range in the head, while Betty Lou was shot 5 times in the back. The bodies were discovered by Stella Borges, who was driving to pick up a relative. After seeing the body, she drove 60 to 70 miles an hour to report what she had seen. She was able to flag down a police officer she saw driving down the road. When the authorities arrived to investigate the scene, David Faraday was clinging to life, but Betty Lou was already deceased. David took his last breath while en route to the hospital. This crime shocked the peaceful community, and a reward fund was set up at the victims' high schools, but the killer was never found. 7 months later, on July 4, 1969, in Vallejo, California, Darlene Ferrin, a married waitress, picked up Michaud at his home. After getting something to eat, they went to Blue Rock Springs Park. After pulling into the park, Darlene turned off the lights and the motor and left the radio playing. After talking for a few minutes, a car that looked similar to the Corvair owned by Darlene pulled in behind them. Michael asked Darlene if she knew who it was, but Darlene simply said, "Oh, never mind." The car suddenly and quickly drove off, but 5 minutes later it returned, pulling up about 10 feet behind Darlene's car. The man had a large flashlight and shined it into the car while walking toward them. Thinking it was a police officer, Darlene and Michael prepared their identification before the man opened fire on Michael. He tried to climb into the back seat, but the assailant kept shooting before moving his concentration to Darlene. The killer then began to walk back to his vehicle until Michael let out a yell. The killer then returned and fired at both of them again before casually walking back to his car and driving away. An injured Michael managed to get out of the car, and after a few minutes a car came by with 3 young hippie types. He managed to get their attention and they alerted the authorities, who arrived 5 to 10 minutes later. While Michael managed to survive the attack, Darlene was not so fortunate. She was pronounced dead on arrival. 40 minutes after the shooting, Vallejo Police Department dispatcher Nancy Slover received a chilling phone call that said,
"I want to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east of Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find the kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye."
Slover reported that the voice was deep and accentless, and seemed to be rehearsed. The only change in his voice was when he said goodbye, when his voice became deep and taunting. Nancy attempted to get more information out of the caller, but he would speak over her and didn't stop talking until he was done with his statement. Darlene was very popular and had many male admirers. Many of them were investigated, as well as her husband, but none were connected with the crime. Recently, a photo was discovered of Darlene with a man who looked similar to the composite sketches of the Zodiac Killer. The man has still not been identified. Michaud fortunately got the first glimpse of the killer. He was described as being white, 5'8" to 5'9", late 20s to early 30s, stocky build, with a round face and brown hair. He was confident he could identify the suspect if viewed from a profile. Only weeks after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner received nearly identical letters from the killer and 1/3 of a 408-symbol cryptogram. The letters gave details unknown to the public, such as the clothes the victims were wearing and the types of ammunition used. The author demanded that the code was reproduced and put on the front page of the newspapers, or else he would go on a kill rampage until he killed a dozen people. The killer closed the letter with a strange cross-circle symbol, resembling a crosshair. The cipher was eventually solved by Donald and Betty Hardin, and the results were, to say the least, disturbing.
I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die I will be reborn in paradise, and all that I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife.
After this chilling glimpse into the mind of a madman, there are seemingly random letters. The meaning of these, if any, has not been discovered. When the authorities questioned the legitimacy of the author's claims, another letter was sent to the Examiner. This time he gave himself a name, Zodiac, and gave even more details and even corrected errors in the news reports. On September 27, 1969, a month after the last letter was sent, law student Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepherd were relaxing on a blanket on the remote shores of Lake Berryessa near Napa, California. During their time on the quiet shoreline, Cecilia noticed a strange man watching them in the distance and told Brian. Brian thought she meant farther away, but he was actually very close, and then he hid behind a tree, making Brian think he was urinating. Cecilia then notified Brian that the man had a gun, and he approached them wearing a bizarre costume. The costume was a dark hood covering his head and shoulders, and on the front of the hood was the Zodiac signature crosshair symbol, with dark glasses covering his eyes. The man reassured the couple that he only wanted their money and car keys so he could get to Mexico, that no one would get hurt. He also said he had killed a guard escaping from prison in Montana. The man pulled out plastic clothesline and asked Cecilia to tie Brian up. Cecilia tied him up loosely, but the man tightened up the binds and then tied up Cecilia himself. Brian, who was also studying sociology, engaged the man in conversation and quietly told Cecilia he might be able to get the gun, but Cecilia told him not to. The man then told Brian to lay down, but Brian refused, claiming it would be too cold. The killer then ordered him to get down at gunpoint. Thinking the man was about to leave, Brian asked him if the gun was really loaded. The hooded man showed Brian a fully loaded magazine before returning it to his holster. Instead of leaving, the man pulled out a knife and stabbed Brian 6 times. Cecilia attempted to roll away, but he got to her, stabbing her all over her body. After the stabbing ended, Brian pretended to be dead, and the killer walked away. He managed to use his teeth to free Cecilia, who was too weak to untie him. Brian attempted to call at several boats, but only one slowed down and then continued down the lake. Cecilia eventually was able to get one of Brian's knots loose, and then he proceeded to fully untie himself and her. Brian attempted to make it to the road, but due to the blood loss, he had to stop several times along the way. Fortunately, when Brian made it to the road, he met a park ranger who apparently was flagged down by the fishermen that had heard their screams, but over an hour had passed since the attack when the ambulance arrived. Brian's car was found with a message written on it by the killer. Vallejo, 12/20/68, 7/4/69, September 27, 69, 6:30, by knife. Around the time the ambulance arrived, Rookie Officer David Slate received a phone call. The killer said,
I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmangia. I'm the one that did it.
The call was traced to a payphone in downtown Napa, and they managed to lift a fingerprint from it. Also found were tire tracks from the Zodiac's car, as well as size 10.5 Wingwalker shoe prints, which showed that the killer might have served in the Navy or Air Force, and these footprints indicated that the Zodiac must have weighed more than 210 pounds. Cecilia Shepherd sadly died 2 days after the stabbing, and her funeral service brought a massive crowd of mourners. Brian Hartnell made a full recovery. 3 young women soon came forward who said they noticed a strange man only hours before the attack occurred, and the police managed to draw a sketch based on their descriptions. While this was the most bizarre crime the Zodiac had committed, it would not be the last. 3 weeks later, on October 11, 1969, Paul Stine picked up a passenger in his taxicab at Mason and Geary Streets in San Francisco and was told to go to Washington and Maple Streets. Instead, the cab stopped at Washington and Cherry, where the passenger shot Paul from behind with a 9mm pistol, killing him instantly. The passenger took Paul's wallet, keys, and tore off a bloody piece of his shirt and wiped fingerprints from the cab before walking away. He was seen from a window in a house across the street by 3 witnesses, who called the police about what they saw. The killer was described as a white male, 25 to 30 years old, 5'8 to 5'9", between 180 and 200 pounds, barrel-chested, who had reddish-blonde crew-cut hair with thick glasses and dark clothes. A bolo was released, for unknown reasons, for a black male. 2 days later, the San Francisco Chronicle received another letter from the Zodiac, with a bloody piece of Paul Stine's shirt, taking credit for the murder, stating that,
"The SF police could have caught me last night if they'd searched the park properly."
The letter ended with a chilling threat.
"School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning, just shoot out the front tires and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out."
Needless to say, this sent the city into a panic, and police officers escorted school buses. This crime was a surprising departure from Zodiac's previous attacks, where he attacked couples in isolated locations. This time the attack took place in a residential neighborhood within a large city. Fortunately, a composite sketch of the killer was made, which was later amended to be more accurate. A month after the attack, officers Donald Falk and Eric Zelms came forward with a terrible blunder. The night of the Stine shooting, the 2 policemen were patrolling the area when they came across a man fitting the Zodiac's description. He was walking toward the east on Jackson Street and then turned north on Maple Street. Since the description was sent out for a black male, the officers didn't even stop him. The case then exploded, attracting thousands of informants, suspects, and false confessions. However, none of these leads directed them to the Zodiac, who continued to contact the press and taunt the police through his letters. On October 20, 1969, a man claiming to be the Zodiac called Oakland Police Department and demanded that lawyers F. Lee Bailey or Melvin Belli make appearances on a local television program hosted by Jim Dunbar. Belli appeared on the show, and eventually a man claiming to be the Zodiac Killer called, referring to himself as Sam. He asked for Belli to meet him in Daly City. The man never showed up. Witnesses who interacted with the real Zodiac claimed the man was not the killer. According to Robert Graysmith's best-selling book Zodiac, the call was then traced to a mental hospital. The Zodiac's next envelope, a greeting card, was sent on November 8, 1969, where he apologized for writing as he just washed his pen, referencing a shampoo commercial from that time period. Along with this letter, he sent a 340-character cipher, which has not been solved definitively to this day. The next day, the killer sent another letter.
"This is the Zodiac speaking. Up to the end of October, I have killed 7 people. I have grown rather angry with the police for telling lies about me, so I shall change the way of the collecting of slaves."
He then said the police would never catch him, and refuted several claims the police made about him, in addition to saying he wore a disguise when he killed. He then claimed that on the night of the Paul Stine murder he actually spoke to police officers and misdirected them. The letter also included a formula for a fertilizer bomb, along with a diagram of the bomb. On December 20th, 1969, the 1-year anniversary of the first confirmed Zodiac murder, Melvin Belli received a letter from the killer, pleading for his help and claiming that he was afraid he would lose control of his murderous urges. The Zodiac Killer didn't make any contact with the press for another 4 months. On April 20th, 1970, he mailed a letter with a cipher that he said contained his name. While many solutions have been proposed for the cipher, none have been confirmed. The Zodiac's next communication, a postcard mailed 8 days later, the murderer demanded that the public wore buttons bearing his crosshair symbol, or that he would have his blast, likely referring to him making use of his bomb. On June 26th, Zodiac claimed that since people didn't wear his buttons, he shot a man in a parked car with a .38. The only crime in the area resembling this description was the shooting of SFPD officer Richard Raditich, but the Zodiac Killer was most likely not truly involved in the crime. Officer Raditich's killer was an African-American man named Joseph Wesley Johnson. The letter also included a map and a cipher. The focus of the map was Mount Diablo, a mountain in Contra Costa County. This letter marked the beginning of a new Zodiac trademark. He began to keep a score with the police department. He closed the letter with
Zodiac 12, SFPD 0.
Zodiac sent his next letter on July 24, 1970. In this letter, he angrily responds to the public not following his wishes to wear buttons. He says,
So now I have a little list, starting with the woman and her baby that I gave a rather interesting ride for a couple of hours.
This was a reference to Kathleen Jones, a young mother who believed she was kidnapped by the Zodiac. Kathleen was driving at night with her infant daughter to visit a sick relative. When a car following her began to blink its lights, Kathleen pulled out and a man got out and approached the vehicle claiming that she had a flat tire, and he said he would repair it. She allowed him to do so and went on her way, only to discover that her wheel was in worse shape than before. She pulled over and the Good Samaritan pulled over again as well, and offered to take her to a service station. The man didn't take her and her daughter to a service station, but continued to drive for over an hour. When she would ask if he was going to stop, he simply changed the subject. Feeling threatened, Kathleen bailed from the car with her daughter in her arms and flagged down a trucker and was uninjured. She claimed later that the man threatened her life, but the police report says that the killer made no threats. When Kathleen arrived at the police station, she pointed to a sketch of the Zodiac Killer and said that he was the man who kidnapped her. Her car was discovered to have been set on fire. While it is possible she encountered Zodiac, it is more likely that Zodiac was merely taking credit for a crime he didn't commit, as he didn't offer any details proving he was the perpetrator. 2 days later, the Zodiac communicated with the press again. Still angry that people were not wearing Zodiac buttons, he broke into a bizarre rant stating that he would torture his 13 slaves in the afterlife. During this letter, he quoted the popular musical, The Mikado, and made a hit list of sorts. The murderer claimed even more victims this time.
Zodiac 15, SFPD 0.
He also gave a clue to the cipher from the June 26th letter, stating,
The Mount Diablo code concerns radians and inches along the radians.
On October 27, 1970, Paul Avery, a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle who wrote about the case, received a Halloween card from the Zodiac. Later, Avery discovered a possible link between the Zodiac murders and that of 18-year-old college student Cheri Jo Bates in Riverside, California. On October 30, 1966, Cheri Jo was walking home from her local college library and was beaten and stabbed multiple times with a short-bladed knife. A men's Timex watch was found at the scene, as well as a military-style heel print from a size 8 to 10 shoe. The killer of Cheri Jo sent several letters, including a typed confession, to multiple people involved in the case. In December of 1966, a very disturbing poem that has similarities to the murder was discovered, scratched into the surface of a desk. Handwriting experts said that the writing was in fact the Zodiac's. Riverside Police Department believes they know who committed the murder, and he is definitely not Zodiac. The Zodiac took credit for the crime in his next letter, mailed on March 13, 1971, to the LA Times, and took credit for 17 murders. This was the last communication that the Zodiac Killer sent for another 3 years. The next letter, mailed January 29, 1974, was a review of The Exorcist. He claimed that The Exorcist was the best satirical comedy that he had ever seen. The letter included strange markings at the end, and the Zodiac claimed to have taken 37 lives. Strangely, this letter did not contain the name Zodiac or his trademark symbol. On February 24th, a suspicious letter later linked to the Zodiac was mailed, and it said that the initials of the Symbionese Liberation Army, SLA, made up the Nordic word for to kill. The letter was not signed from the Zodiac, but rather a friend. The next letter, received on May 8th, was sent by a citizen who was concerned about what he perceived to be murder glorification in the film Badlands, and requested that the San Francisco Chronicle cut the advertisements for it from their paper. The final confirmed letter was mailed on July 8th, where the author, calling himself the Red Phantom, criticized advice columnist Count Marco Spinelli. As of today, no confirmed Zodiac letter has been sent. While many suspects have been named, none have been arrested, so the Zodiac Killer could still be on the loose to this day.